Hello and welcome to my Honors Week presentation. My name is Bridget Charlton and today I will be presenting radio rhythms. Do prosodic changes in DJ talk breaks affect listening comprehension? So first and foremost, what is prosody? Prosody is the rhythmic profile of a person's speech. This encompasses things such as speech speed, articulation, and intonation. And research has shown that there are specific prosodies or rhythms for different types of radio broadcasting. This means that a newscaster is going to present themselves very differently than a broadcaster on a top 40 pop radio station. Research has also shown that listeners are able not only to identify and recognize these rhythms, but also to identify prosodic flaws in broadcasts that are recorded by untrained speakers, even if they don't have a broadcasting background. Therefore, this study tested the effects of these radio prosodies as paired with unassociated scripts on the listening comprehension of college students. So first and foremost, my methods. My study was conducted on Qualtrics, through which consent was obtained and participants remained anonymous. The demographic information I collected was gender, primary language, fluent languages, and field of study, the last three of which were all fill in the blank. For gender, it was split into male, female, and prefer not to say /other. Primary language and fluent languages, participants were divided into English monolinguals and English multilinguals, as all participants had a baseline mastery of English. And finally, for field of study, participants were split into communications related, sciences related, and unrelated majors to see if they would potentially have any pre-existing information that would affect their performance. For my study, I wrote 5 false radio scripts, one for each of the following topics, being weather, music, news, science, and a serious international news story. Then I recorded all of these scripts in each of my 5 target rhythms. First, we have newscaster speech. Now in newscaster speech, we have very high highs and very low lows. It's almost melodic in a way, and you've almost most definitely heard this on your local radio or TV news station. Next is rising intonation. In rising intonation, the intonation stays very consistent until the very, very end, in which you have a burst of sound. This is very common in Spanish newscasting and Spanish broadcasting in general. Next, we have smooth. Now in smooth, it's very low in the register, very smooth phonemic quality in general, and you often encounter this on classical and also jazz radio stations. Next, we have chirpy. You may encounter chirpy on a top 40 or popular rock radio station. This is what you might hear on your morning commute, maybe in a morning radio show or another format in which everything is very loud and very, very upbeat. And finally, we have flat, of which there are no real prosodic elements, and therefore it acted as our control. These 25 recordings, all about 20 seconds long, were divided into 5 conditions, meaning that in each condition, all of the scripts were presented with different rhythms. And then for each of these rhythms, 6 questions were provided after the recording was heard. Participants were randomly assigned one of the 5 conditions, and after completing the demographic questions, they listened to each recording and answered the questions directly after. They were informed that they would not be able to listen to the recording more than once, however, they were able to play it whenever they were ready. Participants who completed less than 85% of the survey, 85% being all of the demographic questions and completion of one of the 5 rhythm sections, were removed from the results, which gave us a total of 104 participants. Now the recordings themselves. I'm not going to make you sit through all of them. However, I wanted to show you what it looks like when the participants took the study. This is what the screen looked like on their phones. So they were informed, again, that they would not be able to listen to the recording more than once and that they would be tested on the content that they heard. Now, obviously, there's the play button, so they would be able to play it whenever they wanted. Over to the left, we have the conditions. So all 5 conditions presented the scripts in the same order, which was weather, music, sports, science news, and international news. However, the rhythms were different. So for instance, in condition 1, the weather story was written in newspeak, but in condition 2, weather was read in chirpy, the chirpy prosody. And on to the results. So first we have figure 1, in which we see the number of correct answers for each script. So there was no significant difference between the scripts except for international news, in which participants did worse for only international news as compared to the rest of the scripts. Next, we have number of correct answers for each rhythm as clustered by gender. Now, this was interesting because the research had shown that gender does not play a significant role into the performance of participants. Now, this is gender of speaker and also gender of participant. However, here we see that only for newspeak, males outperformed females. Next, we have the number of correct answers for each rhythm as clustered by major. Now, again, the majors were split into 3 large groups. 1 being communications related, so having some level of a broadcasting background and knowledge. 2 being science related, so majors such as communication disorders or maybe linguistics that would give them an insight into prosody. And finally, unrelated majors. So for this, we found that rising intonation had a significant difference in which science-related and unrelated majors outperformed the communications majors. And finally, we have the number of correct answers for each script as clustered by major. Now, again, this is very interesting because the communications majors were outperformed by science and unrelated again, and this time it was for the sports story. Now, I've thrown a lot of information at you, but what does it all mean? Unfortunately, the present findings have indicated that my hypothesis stating that rhythm affects listening comprehension is not supported. Some limitations of the study that I would like to improve if I were to conduct this again would definitely be the distribution of the population and the number of participants. It's always good to have more participants, but who those participants are is also very important. So in the future, I would like to have a more even ratio between the majors and also the mono versus multilinguals, because I didn't have nearly enough, or a sufficient number rather, of science-related majors and also multilinguals. And as for what their results actually mean, obviously I would like to investigate in the future more what gender means and also why rising intonation was so much harder than the other prosodies. But what I find really interesting is that the participants who did struggled the most on the international news story as well as the sports story. And this, I believe, is due to partial familiarity. In the international news story and also in the sports story, they were the only ones that included some level of factual information. So for the international news story, it was concerned with the state of affairs in Venezuela, which is a situation that our participants may have been very well aware of. However, given that the story itself was false, but based in a realistic, setting, they may have gotten confused with information that they already possessed and the information that was being presented to them. This also holds true, I believe, for the sports story. In the sports story, all of the players' names, all of the events were false. However, the sports teams' names were not. So I believe that the participants probably, especially because they were communications related, had a very developed understanding of sports and therefore got confused due to partial familiarity. Here are my references. And finally, thank you so much for sitting with me for my honors presentation for Honors Week 2020. Again, my name is Bridget Charlton. I am representing the Cognitive Science track, and this has been my study, Radio Rhythms. Do prosodic changes in DJ talk breaks affect listening comprehension?